Hello, ceramics. Today I'm going to talk to you about glazing. Uh, we're going to go over what kinds of glazes are available to you, where they are in the room, how you can use them, and a couple of tips for success. So to start off with, the glazes that you're going to use to decorate your pieces are right behind me, over here by the sink. We have three different types of glazes. We have store-bought glazes with this white cap that's going to turn out shiny, like this test tile has a little bit of sheen on it. We also have underglazes that have a black cap. Those are going to turn out dull. They won't have a shine. Both of those kind of look like the colors that they're going to turn out as, but you always want to check the test tiles and look at them closely before you pick a glaze to put on your piece. If you look closely at this test tile, you're going to see that the top half of it and the bottom half of the colored section have two slightly different colors. That tells you that if you put down one coat of glaze, it's going to turn out like this color. And that if you put two coats, you're going to get this deeper, richer color on there. We also have our dipping glazes in these big buckets that I mix up for you guys. Those are located over here, and they'll have their name on them. And the test tiles for those glazes look like this on the big board. They also have two colors, and this shows you one glaze color with a different glaze color over the top. So as you're picking out your glazes, you want to look at the test tiles and read them closely in order to get an idea about how the glaze is going to turn out. That being said, glazes won't ever turn out exactly like you see them on the board. How you use the glaze is going to determine what kind of results you get. So the more things you glaze, the better you'll get at glazing. So those four little bowls that you made, I want you to glaze each and every one of them so you start to get a feel for whether you like underglazes, glazes, or whether you like the dipping glazes themselves. However, before you can glaze something, it has to be fired. So this piece, if I try to scratch it, I can't. It's turned this pink color. This just came out of the kiln, so it's kind of ready to go. There are a couple of things I want to do before I glaze this piece or try to apply glaze to this piece. One is I want to take some water and a sponge and I want to give it a good wipe down or take it over to the sink and rinse it, because the cleaner this piece is, and actually if it's got a little bit of moisture in there, it's going to pick up the glaze a lot better. If it's dusty and super dry, it's going to be hard to get two coats of glaze on there without it getting too thick and starting to flake right off. So rinse your piece and that'll help. Second thing you want to do is pick your application technique. If you're painting the glaze on like you're using one of these store-bought glazes, we have over by those store-bought glazes these disposable palette pads. So you can open this up and you can pour out a little bit of glaze on there, and you can take your brush and then you can carefully start painting your glaze on. And if I'm painting the glaze on with a brush, I want that brush to be clean. And I want to get two coats at the very minimum and probably three coats on there to get good, consistent color. Okay? I could also take one of my sponges and dab up my glaze and dab my glaze over the top of my piece. And sometimes that's easier for larger pieces to get kind of an even coat. So your sponge can be used as a tool to make the glazing happen. My preferred way of glazing, especially things like a cup or a bowl, something that I'm going to use, is to dip or pour the glaze. But to do that, I also have to do a couple of things to get ready. Over on the counter, you'll see a hot plate. There The hot plate's going to have wax in it, and we use the wax to seal the bottom of our pieces before we put any glaze on them. This one's already got wax on it. However, if I didn't and I were to get glaze on there and then put it in the kiln, that glaze is going to melt in the kiln. And when it cools, it's going to harden and my piece would be stuck to the kiln shelf. And when I try to take it out of there, the piece would probably break or parts of the pieces would break so that my bottom of my piece wouldn't look very good. To keep that from happening, we have to do one of two things. If you're painting a glaze on, just don't paint the bottom. But if you're dipping your piece into one of my big buckets of glaze, then if you put wax on before then, after you dip, that glaze is going to run right off the wax because the wax and the water don't mix. So I've heated up this wax. Now this is very important. Wax is flammable. Okay? It's a wide pan so we can fit larger things in there, but it's not a double boiler. So we have to keep a close eye on the temperature so that we don't have this wax catch fire. The temperature that I want you to go for is where it says keep warm. Anything above that on this dial on the side of the hot plate, right over here, when you plug it in, you'll see a little light come on. Anything above that, we're starting to risk it flashing and, we have a wax on fire in the room, which is not good. If it starts to smoke and you can really smell it in the room, that's an indication that we're getting close to a temperature that's not going to be safe. So if you see that it is kind of smoking a little bit, take the lid and immediately put the lid on it and then unplug it. Okay? Don't worry about unplugging until you got it covered up. If the lid's already on there, leave it on there and just unplug it. Don't open it up because that rush of oxygen would be the kind of thing that would trigger it and make it burn. So put it at keep warm or below. Okay? It's got to be below 200 degrees, but we're going to go with keep warm or below. So to wax the bottom of my piece, I'm just going to take this cup, I'm going to set it in there, give it a little half turn, and then pick it back up, and I'm going to wait 10 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. After 10 seconds, then I could run my finger underneath here to pick up any drips that are there, and then I can turn it over and look at it. If I dip it in there and then turn it over right away, it's going to run down the side of my piece, and it's really hard to get the wax off of the piece once the wax is on the piece, which is going to make it harder to glaze. So give it 10 seconds before you check the bottom. When you're done with the wax, because it is flammable, you want to turn it off right away. And in this case, I want you to practice unplugging it. Not just turning it off, but unplugging it so that we know it's off and you didn't turn it the wrong way, okay? Which could be a problem. So always unplug it as soon as you're done. Don't just turn it off. All right, so now we're ready to dip our glaze. So I picked out for this cup a glaze called Fire Brick. When I open it up and I look in there, I'm going to notice that it's really watery on top because nobody's used this glaze since March 5th or something like that, right? So behind me on the floor, we have some big whisks that we can use. This one looks a little bit dirty, but this one I've cleaned off. You always want it to look like metal before you use it so that we aren't getting one glaze mixed with another glaze. If our glazes commingle, if we start getting one glaze mixed into another glaze, then both glazes won't be very good for very long. Okay? Sometimes it happens by accident, but we try our best to keep the tools that we put into the glaze nice and clean. So I could take this and put her in there, and I could just start churning and churning and turning and churning. And what I want to do is get a whirlpool going. When I start to see a whirlpool in there, a tornado in the middle of the glaze, and I know that some of that good stuff from the bottom is getting sucked up into the rest of the glaze. Once I've stirred it up a good bit, and this is one of the two things that people do wrong with glazing, they don't stir up their glaze. And I can take my whisk, I can put it down on the table on top of the lid, less to clean up, and then I'm ready to go ahead and dip my piece in there. If that is too much of a workout for you, we also have a drill with a mixing bit on it, and you can put that in there and really quickly you can really quickly get that thing mixed up really well. After each time you use this, you have to unscrew the two black pieces at the end of the drill and rinse that off before you use it in another glaze. So you can use the power tools or you can use your muscles, but stir it up really well. Over on the counter, you'll find what we call dipping tongs. They have these two little kind of jaws that you can grip your piece with. Again, we want these to be nice and clean before we use them. So I'm going to clean them off. And then when you're done using them, since it's something that we share, put it in the bleachy water. But for some pieces, these work great because you can grab a hold of something and you can dip without leaving any fingerprints behind. Other pieces, these might not work that well. If a piece is too heavy, it's going to be hard to squeeze hard enough to hold it, or it's kind of awkward. So it's up to you. Sometimes you can use them and sometimes you can't use them. But with this, I can now dip my piece in there, and it only needs to be in there for a second or two. And I pull her out, and I let her dry. Notice how the glaze ran off the bottom of my piece. Any little beads of glaze that are still there, I can just wipe right off, and that'll be perfectly clean when it goes into the kiln because no glaze is on the bottom. After I hold it for about 10-15 seconds, it's already starting to change color. So I know it's okay for me to put this down, and then I can check and see if there are any drips around the rim that I want to clean up. Probably let those dry a little bit and then touch them with a brush. And then I can also decide if I want to do a second dip. So let's say I wanted to do like kind of a simple pattern on here, but I didn't want to paint it on. I could dip it halfway in and I get a little pattern on the side, a shape that looks like that, or maybe something on the other side, and that'll give it a little bit of pizzazz without having to think of a design. And Mr. Walter has always been about making things easier, so that's one way that I make things easier on myself. Last thing that I want to show you is that staining technique that we talked about when we made this drop pot. And you can see how you can see the texture because of the way the underglaze was applied to this one. Staining is really easy and it's kind of fun. And what I use is a black underglaze most of the time. But for this one, I think I'll use this purple. I'm just going to squirt a little bit of that purple out on my disposable pad here. And I'm going to take this piece that I created and bisque fired already. I'm just going to paint over the surface like I was painting it purple, the whole thing. Don't paint the bottom, okay? We're going to keep it clean on the bottom. And then after I've painted a third of it or maybe a little bit more, I'm going to take some clean water and my sponge. I'm going to start wiping off the surface. And as I continue to do that, I end up revealing the high points, but leaving behind some underglaze in the low points, which will bring out that texture more so than the shadows would do by themselves. You can do this with any color underglaze. I tend to use black for the pieces. And then I can do a glaze over the top of this, but you got to look at the glazes and try to find glazes that'll show a little bit of the underglaze through them. If a glaze is too opaque, you won't see this effect afterwards. So that's a little bit to get you started with glazing. As I said, the more you glaze, the better you're going to get at glazing. So try a couple of techniques with your 4 little practice bowls that you made. Get them in the kiln room so that you can see what the results look like. And the more you do it, well, we hope the more you do it, the better it'll get. I'll see you in class. Have some fun glazing your projects.